Hello, and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Wednesday webinar series, and we thank you for joining us. Before we get things started today, I'd like to take a moment or two to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings you may have. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A windows. To submit your question, type your question into the small text box at the bottom, and when you are finished, please click the send button, and we invite and encourage you to do that at any time during today's program. Our presenter will also be soliciting input from you in addition to some polling questions that will appear on the screen. So when you're asked for that feedback, please type that in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen and click enter. And you will also be able to enter data into polling windows, and we'll be opening those up a little bit later on in the presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Denise Thomas. Denise is president and owner of the Effective Communication Coach, LLC, a consultancy focused on transforming emerging and existing professionals into extraordinary leaders by mastering the arts of communication and networking. With 17 years of experience in working for Fortune 500 companies, Denise has honed the ability to deliver and receive messages across language, cultural, and communication style barriers. Denise continues her focus on empowering people by teaching communication strategy to professionals worldwide, including Egypt, China, and Israel. She proudly serves as leadership co-chair for Tempo Milwaukee Emerging Women Leaders, and sits on the board of directors for the Meta House, and serves on the United Way Emerging Leaders Council in Milwaukee. So with no further ado, Denise, welcome. The audience is all yours now.
Thank you so much, Don, for that introduction. It's always entertaining to hear my bio, so thank you again. And thank you to everyone out there in webinar land for joining today's webinar with the National Black MBA Association. Hopefully, I will be able to meet a number of you during the national conference in Detroit later this month. So can we just do a quick shout out? Can y'all just type in some of the cities that you're representing or where you're based out of today really quick? Do we have any folks from maybe Atlanta? Oh, got Indianapolis. Hey, Deanna, Chi-Town, Auburn, New Orleans. Oh, my goodness. Oh, we have Milwaukee. I love it. Detroit. New Orleans again. Detroit is in the house. What's up, Brian Howard? Thank y'all so much for joining again. I really appreciate you taking the time out. Let's go ahead and get started. So again, today's session, we're going to talk about, as part of how to effectively communicate your way to the top, how can you use ways to really connect with people across different generations? And I know folks out there that can hear me, some of us resonate with the Millennial generation all the way up to what they call the Twilight or Traditionalists. So let's talk about some ways that we can really communicate our way to the top through effective communication. The first thing I want to share with everyone is the effective communication formula. And as we are going through today's session, the most important thing I want everyone to understand is that we each already have the capability to be great leaders because we already have the capability to be great communicators. The first part of being a great communicator is having the ability to inspire. The second is having the ability to influence. The third is having the ability to provide information to our audience and to our listeners that they did not already have before. And the final component is I want everyone to get in touch with their ability to entertain. Does that mean I have to be a professional stand-up comedian, Denise? Absolutely not. This is where you are demonstrating techniques, energies, mechanisms where people really enjoy being in your presence. Think about those people who get on your nerves that you work with. And I want you to contrast that into thinking about how you can already help people feel good to be around you as part of this session. So again, inspire, influence, inform, and entertain are the ways that each of us as part of our leadership can communicate with purpose. So what are we going to talk about today in terms of what I hope each of you will be able to gain? We're going to talk about techniques and mechanisms to bridge the communication gaps across generations. We're also going to learn and understand what makes up a generation in the workplace. In addition to that, we'll talk about what each generation brings to the table in ways that we can also leverage. I know a lot of us, especially the millennials out there, we often hear labels, stereotypes in terms of our work ethic, what we are entitled, etc. We're going to try to alleviate a lot of those stereotypes and talk about how we can leverage what we bring to the table as part of our generation that we resonate with. And then finally, we'll talk about communication techniques that each of us, no matter what generation that we resonate with, can apply in the workplace to really help build those meaningful and effective relationships. Does that sound like a plan? Detroit, since you're in the house, if you can give me a yes or no. Anyone from Detroit, since you're going to be in the Nationals? Thank you. Thank you, Darlene. All right, let's get started. So first, why is effective communication important? I know a lot of us have heard that communication is a soft skill. It is absolutely a critical skill, and I ask that each of you think about relationships that you are currently in, whether they are professional or whether they are personal, and think about why those relationships either succeed or fail. And I can guarantee you that communication is the most critical component to that. Now, for those that are looking at the screen right now, you should be able to recognize everybody. We have Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres in the upper right-hand corner. We have Dr. Dre. We have Jimmy Iovine. We have Snoop Dogg. We have Martha Stewart. Now, each of these individuals come from vastly different backgrounds, vastly different upbringings, and in some cases, different generations. But if you know each of these individual stories, they all share a common denominator that they place their focus on despite what society had defined in order to be successful and live and demonstrate their passion every day. So, for example, I'm going to ask, for those out in the webinar, what do you think Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine share in common despite their differences in ethnicity and generation? Anybody have an idea? Just type it for me real quick. Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. Music. Music is the common denominator that despite their differences externally and despite the differences in age, they join forces to create a new and innovative way on how people record and listen to music, which then became a product or a brand known as Beats by Dre. And a small little company by the name of Apple acquired Beats by Dre from Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine in the small amount of $3.2 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to go through these slides, I want each of us to think about the individuals on this screen. And despite their differences, whether it be generational, whether it be cultural, whether it be sexual orientation, they focused on the importance of using effective communication to build relationships to ultimately build and drive success. So as we talk about generations and the makeup of generations, let's just quickly revisit some of the areas of diversity in the workplace that each of us, regardless of our ethnicity, we manage every day. The first is what we're going to be talking about today, which is age. And keep in mind that cross-generational communication is based and significantly based upon how each generation was conditioned and socialized. Then we have the more obvious: gender, race, culture, life experience. These are all things that within our experiences in the workplace, in school, that we factor in as it relates to how we include each other to ultimately drive the ideation and the innovation that our employers, that our organizations, that our churches rely upon each of us. So let's take a quick poll now that we have an understanding in terms of why effective communication across generations is important, as well as the makeup. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions. Feel free to give me what your answers are, again, by using the Q&A box. The first question is, what % of the U.S. workforce do you think will retire over the next 5 years?
And Denise, I apologize. Unfortunately, my computer is not cooperating with me right now, and it's not allowing me to open the polling that we just created. So I think if we could use the Q&A box if that works for you until we get everything straightened out here and back on track.
That's okay, Don. This works perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay, I've got Sonia. She guessed 30%. Yvonne, 45%. Angela Foster Woods. Hey, Angela, we've got 40%. We've got some good guesses. Okay. Well, most of you were very close, 40%. So that means, ladies and gentlemen, that out of every 10 people that you are working with as of today, 4 of those 10 are looking to give you the deuces. Throw up the peace sign. Next question. By the year 2020, nearly what percentage of the American workforce will be under the age of 32? Let's see. We've got 55, 25, 60. All these are some good answers. Okay. Keep them coming. Love it. 60%. Someone said 90%. Oh, we're going to have a very young workforce by the year 2020. So, Don, I'm going to ask if you can disable that screen. I'm going to show the answer here. Thank you so much. 50%. So, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind that by the year of 2020, half of the people that will be part of your colleague base will be under the age of 32. Third, did you know, 56%, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this, of college students worldwide across the globe said they would not take a job that banned what? Give me some guesses. Working from home, that's a good one. Dogs at work. Social media. Someone typed in, okay, telecommuting, cell phone. All right, well, here's the answer. Social media. Social media is something that 56% of college students worldwide would not take a job if that were banned. And that makes sense because I know a lot of the companies, the Fortune 100 and as well as Fortune 500 corporations in today's setting realize that social media is a great tool for not only marketing, but engaging their consumer base. Last, did you know? Okay, from millennials out there, 65% of millennials say losing their blank or their blank would have a greater negative impact on their daily routine than losing their car. Someone said phone or internet access. We got phone or internet access. Cell phone, yep. Okay, we've got some pretty consistent responses. Phone, Wi-Fi. Someone said freedom. I love it. Cell phone. Okay, let's take a look. And the answer is, and ladies and gentlemen, the majority of you are absolutely correct. It is the phone or computer. So what I want everyone to take away from this slide is that we've got some pretty significant transitions as it relates to how many of us that may have started our professional careers 20 years ago compared to how it is now. And the question is, regardless of what generation that you resonate with or that you feel you belong to, what we cannot discount or disregard is that we have to understand technology will constantly advance, change is inevitable, but also we have to start placing our focus on what makes each generation who they are and why they perform the way they do at work. When we have that type of understanding and awareness, it really helps us leverage, again, the attributes, the dynamics of each individual so that we can meet our common goal, just as Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine did, just as Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart do currently, just like Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres. So let's talk about what makes up a workforce generation. So right now, currently, in most workplaces, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, you have a common group of baby boomers, millennials, and Generation X. And what you see on the screen are the ages, typically, of what each of these generations are and the years they were born. So for full disclosure purposes, I'll let you all know right now, I'm 42. So I am part of the Gen X group. However, I tend to resonate a lot with millennials because I have two children who are millennials. Now, what makes a workforce generation? So usually it's about 20-year gap, as you can see on the screen. It's also a very society-wide peer group, and we're going to talk about what that means here in the next couple of slides, and also a common persona. So, for example, Gen Xers, we come from the age of where telephones were more common in the household, and then we started to transition into emails. But between the telephone and the emails, we had what we called pagers or beepers. Can I get a shout out from anybody who had a fluorescent yellow or pink beeper or pager in high school? Am I the only one out there? Can anybody give me a shout out? Clear blue, yes. Thank you, Tremaine and Andre. Pink, yes. So these are things that we shared as part of Gen X that other generations share in terms of common persona. Also, when you think about who you're working with from a generational standpoint, and I know some of you are already visualizing the group of people that you know come from a different generation, and you're thinking, man, they don't get it, or I don't get them. It's a challenge. I want you to start to think about how each of these generations were made, how they were socialized, and how they were conditioned. And the ingredients to that have a lot to do with the circles that you see on the bottom of the screen. History and events, pop culture, economic conditions, social changes, and technological advances. And I'm going to hone in a little bit on economic conditions because I know that when I was starting my professional career about 20 years ago, I was conditioned and socialized to have the understanding that your paycheck was your bonus. Your paycheck was your award. And you need to go to work, keep your head down, do your job, be the last one to leave, and go home. And based on what I saw from my parents that had the same job for 30 years, it was you take a little off the top, you pay your tithes, and you save, you save, you save. And but what I had to realize is that when I started becoming a mother and I started to raise my children, they began to witness things that I was raised to manage that were now diminishing. For example, 401k. For example, pension. And so each of these things that I experienced that now my children are no longer seeing caused them to have different perceptions or views regarding economic conditions and working. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in addition to generations changing and evolving, we're also going to have a considerably more diverse workforce in terms of race. So when you combine race, when you combine that with generation, it is going to bring a lot of dynamics into the workplace. They're going to change how we engage with each other every day. So if you look at this slide, back when my parents were working, it was usually 1 out of every 6 people was a person of color. If we fast forward to today and going forward with the Generation Z, out of every 2.5 people, one of those people will be a person of color. So when you combine the generations and when you combine what people see on the outside, this is a perfect opportunity to take a step back and see how you can be more aware, how you can be more receptive on how people were socialized and conditioned as it relates to how you engage with people at work. So what I'm going to ask everyone out there in Webland, if you can give me some pop icons that are relevant for a millennial. So I'll give you an example. Beyonce. Just give me some pop icons that you think are relevant in terms of being a millennial or resonating with that generation. President Obama, yes. Justin Bieber. Kirk Franklin. I love it, Yvonne. Yes. Kim Kardashian, Ariana Grande, Drake, Jay-Z. Yes, great one. Now let me switch it up a little bit. Now, if you were someone who is a baby boomer, who is between the ages of, let's say, 55 and 70, give me some pop icons that were part of their generation. Aretha Franklin, yes, the Queen. Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Wonder, Steve Harvey, Dr. King, yes, absolutely. Now I want to take it a little bit further in terms of why people are who they are. Let's go back to the traditionalist generation. So these are people who were born between the ages of 70 and above. And especially as it relates to the African American community or the Black community, think about some defining moments that defining moments in addition to things that shape their world. Civil Rights Act, that's a great one. Thank you, Benjamin. Slavery, yes. Civil rights, the MLK and Kennedy's assassination, segregation, absolutely. Civil rights, the Voting Act, thank you, Angela. These are all great things, great and relevant items that have shaped these individuals into terms of how they socialize and condition. Now, we're going to take a little deeper dive here, and this is where it starts to get revealing in terms of how people are at work and why they are. Now, based on the generation that you resonate with, or based on the generation of people that you work a great deal with, in one word, I want you to describe work ethic style. Give me one word to describe the work ethic style for the generation that you either are in. Fluid. That's a great one. Thank you, Nolan. Baby boomer. Progressive. Yes. Dedicated. Baby boomer. Thank you, Sonia. Dependable. Flexible. Dynamic. Loyal. So I'm going to pause right there. Thank you, Heather, for that. I'm going to guess dependable, loyal, hardworking are words that associate with the Gen X generation. Because from a common or stereotypical standpoint, based on how we were socialized, especially as people of color, coming from that generation, again, you were told to work hard, be the last one to leave, and your paycheck was your reward. Now, as we get into the millennial generation, I want folks to think about this. Think about the stereotypes that are often used to describe millennials in terms of entitled, lazy, disloyal. And let me stand for the record, I am pro-millennial. I love my millennials. My kids are millennials. If I need anything that takes me an hour done in 5 minutes, I call them up and they get it done. But what I want us to realize is that as we talk about the millennial generation and the subsequent generation of Gen Z, keep in mind that every generation is a product or result of how they were conditioned and socialized from the prior. So as a single mother of 2 children who is part of the Gen X generation, I worked hard. And oftentimes I had to make choices in terms of whether I was going to be able to make my son's football game or his practice or my daughter's recital, because I still wanted to be able to provide the same experiences that my 2-parent household had provided me, but yet I felt guilty because at times I had to sacrifice. So what do you think I did as part of feeling guilty to make myself feel less guilty and to so-called help my children get better about my absence? What do you think I did? Yes, I spoiled my children. I overindulged. I overcompensated. I bought them things. Yes. And yes, Nolan, sometimes even treated them as friends. So when you think about how we, as part of different generations, socialize and condition the subsequent, in this example, the millennials, I could not be mad when my children expect a trophy or an award just for doing what they're supposed to do, because at times I would give them awards and accolades, and I didn't even know what they did. My son probably didn't even play 5 minutes in the game, and I still gave him a trophy because of how I felt guilty based on my workload, my work ethic, and being a single parent. So it's important for all of us, as we think about the people that we work with, the generations, the cultures, consider why they are who they are and how they were socialized and conditioned. Now, let's take a look at this slide in terms of multiple generations at work. So we all work in an environment where there are probably more than one generation. This slide gives you a perspective in terms of what experiences that shaped each of these generations, as well as what work means to that generation. What are the aspirations? What does changing jobs look and feel like, as well as career paths? I'm going to pick on the millennials just one more time. So when you think about experience, millennials generation have had way more experience in terms of diversity, technology, natural disasters, terrorist attacks on our own land here in the United States of America. Work is no longer, in terms of this generation, something that has to be done. Oftentimes, it can be a means to an end. My son already at the age of 20 has his own clothing line, and he is successful at it. So for him, education is a formality. He definitely admires the concept of having a formal education, but for him, passion, pursuing his dream, and having that residual income precedes having a 9-to-5 job. Changing jobs is expected. And a lot of companies, including a lot of our corporate sponsors, realize that in order to sustain top talent is significantly based on how the new hires introduced. And this could be very well through leadership programs, through accelerated training, et cetera, but it is definitely going to have to be a frequent and fast career path. So when we think about these different dynamics that make each of us up at work, then comes into the question, how do we communicate? So let me ask you this. Just give me some of the communication challenges that we are facing right now in the workplace. Too much email, meeting too much, language barriers, email looks like text jargon, too direct. These are all valid communication challenges that we face in the workplace. And a lot of these challenges that we face are based on how we perceive the message, which is then further based on how we were socialized and conditioned in our households, in our schools, in our community. So one of the things I'm going to ask each of you to consider is when you think about the challenges that you're facing, think about the audience. Think about the person on the receiving end. How many of us are taking the time or the opportunity to establish what is the preferred communication technique across each of the people that we work with? So, for example, someone who comes from maybe the Generation X or the traditionalist generation prefers to be written. Some people, based on how they were socialized and conditioned, prefer to be called. Some people prefer email. Others, again, based on how they were conditioned, prefer face-to-face. So each of these generations, based on the technological advances and how they were introduced to communication, often determine what is the best way to communicate with that particular audience. Now, I'm going to ask, again, the audience out there in Webland, based on what you know of me already, what do you think my preferred communication technique is, whether it's work or outside of work? Take a guess. Let's see. Yvonne, you are absolutely right. It is face-to-face all day. Yes. I love people. And as a communications coach, I am all about not just what I hear or the verbal, but nonverbals. I want to see you. I want to see your facial expressions. I feel more connected to you by seeing you face-to-face and emailing. I'm one of those people where if we're going back and forth emailing and the email gets to about the fifth one, I'm getting up and I'm walking over to your desk. I'm walking over to your workstation or your office, and I'm asking, can we have a powwow? And so I love the fact that a lot of you all understood that. And that's what we have to start doing a better job of letting folks know, what is your preferred communication technique? What is going to bring out not only a good response from you, but the best performance from you every day based on your preferred communication technique? I'll give you another quick example. When my daughter left for college, it was my son and I was upstairs in my bedroom watching TV, doing some emails, and I got a text message. And it was my son. Where do you think my son was when he sent me that text message? Anybody take a guess? In the house. Yes, in the house. He was downstairs in the house texting me knowing that I was just one level above. And he had the audacity to text me, what's for dinner? Now, we won't get into the details of that conversation for the purpose of FCC regulation, but I was very frustrated because I needed my son to understand that being in the position of needing something, it's going to be important that you recognize what that person's preferred communication technique or mechanism is. So since then, if my son needs something from me, whether it's advice, money, support, love, he knows the best way to get a response from me is to either pick up the phone or call me or walk up to the room where I am, because that's how we're going to have the most inclusive, engaging conversation. So when you think about techniques or mechanisms that you can leverage in order to have a more effective work relationship, a more productive work relationship, to have more diverse work relationships, it's going to be important that each of us take the responsibility to understand what our team members' preferred mechanisms are as it relates to communication. And it's also going to be important for each of us to share what our preferred communication mechanisms are from day one or tomorrow. So when you go back to the office tomorrow, if you are experiencing a challenge where there's way too many emails, start to engage with that person by responding face-to-face, if that's what you prefer. Educate people on how you prefer to communicate, and also understand and embrace how they prefer to communicate with you or others. This is the biggest challenge that we face in the workplace today. It is not only being aware of our our own triggers of great performance, but it's also understanding the others. So when we talk about understanding communication techniques, this oftentimes helps us drive more inclusivity behaviors or inclusive behaviors in a diverse workplace. And ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind, when I use the word diverse, I want us to start to think about other aspects, not just ethnicity or race, but again, generation. So think about ways that you can collaborate with each of the generations that you work with based on what they bring to the table. So traditionalists come from a community. When you think about during the early stages of the Civil Rights Act, there was not a lot of integration. So African Americans or Black folks had to rely on each other as a part of community. How can you leverage someone who comes from that generation in order to move the needle, whether it be a project, whether it be an ask, whether it be a meeting, whether it be key individuals or key stakeholders that you meet in that meeting? How can you leverage what each of these generations bring to the table in order to achieve success, in order to meet the deliverable? And this is a perfect example of being able to take, yes, Heather Browning said knowledge. Absolutely. Each of these generations have something, and when you think about the generations that may have been more tenured or more experienced or have a longevity within that organization, there's a lot of knowledge that's to be shared. Respect. Yes. You know, our generation, my generation especially, and I struggle with that now, is I was brought up in a household where it was yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And it's not that the millennial generation doesn't have respect because they don't use those words. It's just that were those individuals socialized and conditioned to use that type of language? How do millennials demonstrate respect? How do they demonstrate appreciation? Understanding how each of the generations are made is a huge advantage in terms of being able to work and communicate effectively with each other in the workplace. I love the feedback. Millennials want what every other group wants, and that is, I can't see the end of that. Oh, yes, family, housing, and maybe college. Absolutely. Thank you, Nolan, for that. So let's talk about some things that you can apply once you leave today's session. So I'm going to ask that each of us, as we start to think about ways that we're going to be more embracing, be more receptive, think about some tactics that you can use to work with cross-generational teams. So if everyone can take an inventory of things they're going to start to do, stop doing, and continue to do based on what you see on the screen, I promise you that you will see a difference in terms of being able to move the needle and being able to alleviate a lot of the communication barriers that are preventing performance, high performance, and exceeding expectations within our workplace. First, rethink the boring stuff. Change is inevitable. Regardless of what generation we resonate with or are part of, change is going to happen. How can we start to drive more conversation across the generations to develop ideation and innovation? Flex the hours. No matter what age you are, ladies and gentlemen, we all have a life outside of work. And a lot of us are more productive during a certain time of the day than others. So how do we start to have the conversations around, this is when you're going to get the most out of me in terms of great performance. And these are also some times where I need to be able to take care of my personal life without feeling guilty. Older and younger employees have to be able to have conversations to where we can mentor each other in different ways, whether that's, again, organizationally or technologically. And also, we have to start giving good reasons. And again, this is across any generation in terms of getting stuff done. If you have a problem, communicate the solution and be receptive to change and be receptive to what each of the generations bring and how we can build off of that and learn from each other. So now, before we close or get into the Q&A segment, I want to highlight again what each of these generations bring to the table. What I'm going to ask is that you take this screen as a sample and go back to your desk, to your workstation, to your office, or even as you're commuting from work to home, and think about what each of the generations bring to the table based on your experience. Whether good or an opportunity, just take a quick inventory. And then from that inventory, think about ways that you can use effective communication to leverage what each of these generations are commonly known as bringing to the table, and opportunities, again, through the power of effective communication that can help drive consensus. So if I'm a millennial and I'm someone who is very team-oriented, team-focused, but yet I tend to feel pressured, maybe this is an opportunity where I can work with someone who is part of the Gen X or traditionalist group, because although they may not have been socialized or conditioned to work in a lot of team groups, they're someone who has managed and dealt with pressure in the workplace. And because I have dealt with a lot of pressure in terms of being the only person of color in the workplace versus the millennial generation, but I also have a challenge with working with groups of people, these are things that we can leverage together and collaborate to learn from each other, share ideas, have the conversations around what it is about you that I'm challenged with and what it is about you that I admire to, again, move that needle in the workplace and be as successful as we can be. I've got a comment from Sonia. Millennials are impatient with baby boomers as far as teaching or helping them with technology. And Sonia, this is a perfect example. Thank you for that comment, where you can help millennials through the power of your experience and conversation understand the significance of helping me so that I can help you based on all the knowledge and experience that I have. So make it a win-win. And if that millennial happens to be my son, you let me know, and then I'm going to give him some old school punishment. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so before we get to the Q&A sessions, I want to just leave some WIFMs for you. And WIFMs are what's in it for me. Based on what you've gained from today's session, part of the value proposition is that anytime you're able to make someone feel connected or valued in the workplace by embracing who they are and why they are who they are, it drives authenticity. And I perform better than other times when I am able to demonstrate my best authentic self at work. Also, when we start to have conversations and understand, again, the makeup of generations and why we are who we are, it drives ideation, it drives innovation, and it overall helps us develop success across our workplace that also represent our customer base or our consumer base. Finally, how do you measure success? So Denise, based on everything that you've said to me, I may come up with an action plan to start doing this and stop doing that and continue to do this. How do I measure success? Whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're a people manager, a CEO, a student, understand that the more that you embrace the generation by having communication, by having conversation, you're going to see less turnovers. You're going to see less money left on the table because you have people who, regardless of the good days and the bad days, want to be there. They feel connected. They feel valued. It's a lot easier to recruit top talent when you have a diverse workplace, but is also communicating with one another, finding out how to bridge those gaps. And obviously, whenever you have higher engagement from employees, it organically drives and generates growth within your business. So what is your role? Now what do I do? First, you understand why your employer and why you care as an individual in terms of bridging the gap across generations in the workplace. Speak up for bridging the inclusion gap. Change the narrative. Facilitate a session in terms of how the different generations in the workplace can work together. Create a connection. Build a relationship. Start to organically develop relationships with those generations that you don't resonate with. Share the value proposition of inclusion with your colleagues. So in order for us to really move the needle on this deliverable, I need to be more inclusive. I need to be more engaged and involved with generations that are outside of mine. And I'm sure as I'm reading this, this sounds a lot like a lot of your company's inclusion or diversity plans. And continue to remember that generations are a makeup of diversity. And always reference the key business realities that require inclusion and diversity. So if our talent pipeline is going to increase across the Millennial and Generation Z generations, I need to position myself to understand how this aligns with my personal goals and objectives, as well as my employers. So ladies and gentlemen, think about ways, again, that you can be inspiring and influence all of your coworkers, as well as yourselves, regardless of the generation, on ways to demonstrate inclusive behaviors and seek out diversity by understanding what it means and why it matters to you as well as to your employer. So with that, I'm going to ask, before we get into the Q&A, that each of you take about 3 to 5 minutes after today's workshop, based on what you've gained today, to just take a few moments and document mechanisms, gestures, conversations, relationships that you're going to initiate, start, as well as things, practices, conversations, words that you're going to stop using or stop doing, and things that you're going to continue to do. And as you prepare, if you're going to attend the amazing national conference coming up in the great city of Detroit at the end of the month, think about people that you can start to develop relationships with as part of holding you accountable. Great leaders are great communicators. However, it's also contingent upon how we as a community hold ourselves accountable. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Kimberly, first question, she asked, will you be sharing your presentation? Absolutely. You will receive this presentation. What other questions do you have? You can ask me anything you want.
And as a reminder for our audience, the Q&A window can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. To submit a question, please type it in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click the send button or push enter.
Sonia says, thank you for the great information. Sonia, thank you for participating. Nolan, he says, what makes Detroit great? Let's see. The music. Aretha, she was born yet. Aretha. I love Detroit because oftentimes I sleep there on my way to Toronto. Resiliency, yes. Leopold, you have a question. What is your question? I love that name. I hope I pronounced it correctly. What about businesses going global? In terms of what? I'm sorry, can you expand on that? Okay, I'm going to come back to Leopold. So Sylvia asked, how do you assist millennials in growing when they believe they are ready for leadership? So here's the thing about leadership, Sylvia. Leadership is a very subjective concept. And I think the first process is understanding how they define leadership. So if leadership for anyone is a matter of being promoted very quickly, it's then a matter of understanding What is it that drives your performance? And how are you truly going to be able to influence change? And so regardless of whether it's title or whether it's money, Sylvia, what I'd ask you to do is assist those millennials in first understanding what type of leader they want to be. Do they want to be a servant leader? Do they want to be a leader of an organization? Do they want to be a leader that drives change and culture? What is the type of leadership they want to be? And from that, you can assist them in understanding how they can grow based on that type of leadership. So Brian asked, I hope that answers your question, Sylvia. Brian asked, what are some ways to change the image that some of the other generations have of millennials? Great question, Brian. And that, again, is to have the conversation. We internalize a lot of the stereotypes or perceptions that we have of each other. What's going to drive that change of that image is engagement, conversation, and communication. Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine are about 15 to 20 years apart, and they would have never designed Beats by Dre and thus having a billion-dollar product if they did not start having the conversations and building relationships and understanding, besides their differences, what they shared in common. Start having the conversations around common denominators that each of the groups share a passion. Hope that answered your question, Brian. Natasha Van Wright, can you provide more information about how to engage baby boomers? Absolutely. Understanding, again, what shaped their world, the technological advances, their pop icons, the big events that happen. You first have to understand why and how and who. So when you think about engaging more with baby boomers, just like in any relationship, if I want to engage more with Asian people or Hispanic people, I have to appreciate where they come from. What is it that makes them who they are? What drives greatness out of them? What are some of the things that they don't like? What are things that make them comfortable? What are things that make them uncomfortable? These are all things that you have to use communication as a way of understanding how to engage. The more you know about what makes a person who they are, it will be a lot easier to engage with them. Hope that answers your question, Natasha. Carla, how do I get buy-in from top leadership for what you presented? The way to get buy-in, Carla, is to directly tie what you've gained to how they can make money. Leadership, top leadership, CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, at the end of the day, their board of trustees, their stakeholders, and most importantly, their shareholders ultimately want to know, how is what you're doing making this company more money? How is what you're doing making this company more profitable? How is what you're doing putting this company in the position for longevity? I'll give you an example. Nike just hired Colin Kaepernick to be their spokesperson. There's been a lot of questions around, was this a success move or a detrimental move? And I can guarantee you, without even being in the room when they made the decision with the C-suite executives, that they had a lot of conversations in terms of the long-term impacts of this. How is this going to be an historical, long-building, profitable event, long-term, not short-term? Same thing that you can do when you're having these types of conversations with top leadership for your company. How is what you're hearing today going to ultimately help your employer be successful? What are some of the biggest barriers you have seen when communicating across generations? Thank you, Jada, for that question. Some of the biggest barriers, I would say, is getting the right people in the room. So I think when you're communicating across generations, you need to have someone established and already identified that is going to be open and receptive of change and integration and innovation. Whenever you're moving any type of needles at a magnitude such as cross-generational or cross-cultural, you're going to definitely need to have some change agents. And when I don't have change agents, or when I don't have an audience who is already receptive or adamant about changing, that then becomes a barrier. So make sure you have the right folks in the room that embrace change and that embrace having those conversations. I hope that answered your question, Jada. Leadership is not just a supervisor or boss, but leading by example. Absolutely. 1,000% agree. Would millennials rather not be called millennials? What's your thought? Well, I'll give you, from my perspective, I don't like to be categorized or put in any box for that matter, but I think based on the purpose of today's session or based on the topic at hand, sometimes you have to use words that compartmentalize or categorize, but I think it would be good to establish with that group, what would you like to be called? So if you're working with a group of individuals that are either part of the millennial group or resonate, not so much in terms of what they would rather be called, but how you can engage better with them, how you can work better with them. That would be my advice. All right. And Natasha asked, what are additional good resources available for cross-generational communication? Me. Go to my website, book me, hire me. Email me, call me anytime, Natasha. I'm ready for you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Benjamin said there's a long one. Yes, thank you, Natasha. Benjamin says, I'm a 34-year-old Black male and become a little uneasy sometimes when interviewing with millennial white men and women for corporate jobs. How can I address this? I believe my uneasiness happens because I am aware of research indicating that Blacks' records are looked at less favorably. People favor people who resemble themselves when holding other things constant. Unmotivated by employers' communications, PR teams have composed of mostly white women. This is despite the fact that I have a pretty good academic, personal, and professional credentials. MBA Notre Dame, broadcast journalism Northwestern, and as a reporter have interviewed people from U.S. presidents to the U.S. homeless. Benjamin, my brother, I'm going to ask that you start to take a step back and become more self-aware of what your personal mission, vision, and purpose is, and only have conversations with, only apply for companies that truly have a culture and a mission that align with yours. Because it sounds as though you are providing your time and energy to organizations that don't deserve you. So if you step into a room and the energy is communicating that they don't want you based on what you look like, it's time for you to walk out the door. And I strongly encourage you to attend the national conference, connect with me, and I will personally walk with you around some companies during the job fair that embrace people that look like you, that have your academic background, and would be honored to have a conversation with you. I hope that answered your question, Benjamin. Awesome. Well, Don, I think we've got a minute left. Before I pass the mic back to you, Don, for everyone that took the time to join, share your time and your energy and your engagement, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been a wonderful webinar for me, and again, based on each of you joining. I look forward to meeting everyone during the Nationals. My information is listed here. We will definitely share the presentation with you. Feel free to give me a shout out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Feel free to follow me, send me a text message, call me, email me, and again, look forward to working and meeting with each of you in the next coming weeks. Thank you again so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you to our audience. On behalf of NBMBAA, I'd like to thank our presenter for a great program and you, the audience, for your participation in today's event. This will conclude today's program. Thank you, and have a nice day.